As sports history fans, we often reminisce about the legends. Willis Reed limping onto the NBA Finals court, Curt Schilling's bloody sock, Kerry Strug's courageous dismount, and so many more. These moments often define sports history. But what about the countless injuries that did not become legends, or careers that were derailed due to inadequate care? That's where this episode's sponsor comes in. Introducing to you, ILP Sports Consultants, your trusted sports injury partner, available 24/7. Brian Maelli at ILP Sports Consultants has over 20 years of experience in the orthopedic and sports medicine industry, and he has worked with athletes across the gamut, from youth to amateurs, professionals, in almost every sport played in the United States of America, accommodating athletes at every stage of their career. This adaptability ensures that ILP services are perfectly tailored to your skill level, no matter where you are in your athletic journey. With ILP, you are in control. Choose the steps that matter most to you. Diagnosis, treatment plan, recovery, or the whole journey. ILP services are tailored to your unique needs. Rushing for care is a common pitfall, leading to future problems. ILP Sports Consultants helps you make the right decisions, ensuring that you receive timely and safe care. And here's a bonus. Brian hosts the Injured List podcast, sharing insights and athlete stories you won't want to miss. Whether you're a concerned parent or grandparent, or an athlete yourself seeking guidance, ILP Sports Consultants is your beacon of hope in sports injury management. Visit ilpsports.com today. That's the letters ilpsports.com. ILP Sports Consultants, where your well-being is the priority and your recovery is the mission. Choose ILP Sports Consultants for a healthier sports journey, helping you get back in the game the smart way. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. According to the National Museum of American History, in 1901, James Gibb, an Englishman, discovered celluloid balls in the United States, and he found them perfect for the play of ping pong, jolly old chap. Flash forward a little more than 120 years, in Canton, Ohio, it was a ping pong ball and some, red Solo cups at a booth of the Fantasy Football Expo, where I met this week's guest, fittingly, from a site called Fantasy Six Pack. Welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where each episode is a journey back in time to explore the unique experiences of some of the coolest and most influential people in the fantasy football industry. I'm your host, Arnie Chapman, also known as the Football History Dude. Now, I love fantasy football, and I want you to come along with me to explore the yesteryear of the armchair gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour. This time as we step to the DeLorean, the date is, well, I don't know what date it is. It's just sometime at the beginning of 1902, and we're in St. Louis, Missouri. Or we're somewhere in any kind of bar all around America. I would say it's beginning of the year we're going to watch a Super Bowl, but this is 1902. And we just heard this news. Anheuser-Busch just brewed 1 million barrels of beer last year for the first time, and is now easily the largest brewer in America. 1901. Anheuser-Busch goes for 1 million barrels. The same year that James Gibb found the celluloid balls, and then they determined that it would be better for ping pong. That would ultimately become ping pong balls? Then we talked to a dude from Fantasy Six Pack on this week's episode. Just saying, maybe it's all a coincidence, but maybe it's not. James Gibb kind of sounds like Jameer Gibb. Again, just saying. But welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories. And I promise, this truly is a fantasy football show, not a beer commercial. But if they want to be our sponsorship, I guess we'll take it. Works for me. But it's just fitting because I literally met this week's guest by playing beer. Well, it really wasn't beer pong. It was just ping pong balls with an empty cup. But I met this week's guest by playing pong at a booth at the Fantasy Football Expo this past year to win a hat, which, no, I got this hat. We talked about that in an interview, and a 6-month subscription to Fantasy Six Pack. the subscription is premium quality. And I think you should probably go take a look at it after this interview. I got to listen to the interview first, got to buy in. But to get there, you go to fantasy6pack.net. Again, this is a premium fantasy football site, but you'll find out from this week's guest and the word number 6, but it's not just all about football. They have all sorts of other sports over there as well. And speaking of this week's guest, we have the co-founder, Joe Bond. And we'll learn more about him in a little bit here. But first, got to give you a quick update for the SHN Listener League. Last week, my Lions put a beat down on those Green Bay Packers. In Lambeau Field, mind you not. But yours truly had Sun God, Big Hutch, and Laporta in the lineup. Not horrible by any means, but I didn't have Mr. I'm going to be questionable and then have a career-high workload, David Montgomery, in my lineup, because I made my lineup a little bit before I even knew that he was going to play. So, first off, rookie mistake, make sure that you know who's going to play. But second, I don't know if I would have played him anyways, because I had those other guys locked and loaded to begin with. But again, SHN Listener League is free, and we're playing over on Tailgate Fantasy Sports. To learn more or to sign up, even if it's in the middle of the year, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/tailgate. And with that, let's head into learning more about Fantasy Six Pack with Joe Bond. Wait a second. Just hit me. I can't believe I didn't make a James Bond reference. I'll do that now, GoldenEye, all that other stuff. But seriously, let's get into this interview with Joe Bond. So actually, we met first at the booth there at the Fantasy Football Expo. I did the little beer pong thing and I won a hat. Oh, I don't have my hat on. It's way back there. You probably can't see it. There we go. It's there. Got you hanging out in the corner way up there.
Oh, nice, man. Oh, you got the blue one?
You even told me, you're like, yeah, when I was there, everybody, I did a poll and they're like, well, I'd rather have a shirt. And then everybody was grabbing hats that day, you said.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like I did a whole like Twitter poll and I was asking people on Slack and Discord. And I was like, if you guys had to choose between a hat or a shirt, what would you pick? Man, and it was like 70-30 shirts. So that's like the ratio I did. And then like, we had 2 hats left within the first like hour and a half. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, it actually works out for me because I didn't have many hats. And now after the convention, I got like 3 or 4 of them up there and everything. So I can always just throw one on anytime.
Nice.
So I get it. So the whole premise of the show is we're going to be just going over your history of like how you got into, Fantasy Six Pack, but then just go back in time and such like that a little bit too. Excuse me. One of the first things I always do is I ask the guest, okay, so first, what is your, I guess you could say, what team are you loyal to, or if you even have a team that you're loyal to anymore?
So if we're talking NFL team, I took a break for a little bit, but it's the now Washington Commanders. So grew up in the DC area and went to the then Redskins season games. We had season tickets as a family. And so just grew up a diehard Redskins fan. And then it wasn't because they were losing. I mean, that happens, right? I'm not gonna do that. But Snyder I could not root for the man or anything he had his hands on after all the allegations came out from him. And just the dude's a total scumbag, right? So couldn't do it. So now that he's gone, I'm back. I bought myself a Commander's hat, and I think the future's bright for them. It's going to take a little while to kind of get things on the right track, but it's good
as
so
you mentioned that with the whole Schneider and stuff, I'm trying to think of the guy's name. I think it was Preston Marshall. Was he not their founder, but like purchased him, and he was kind of a D-bag too back in the days. Weird that when you think about nation's capital and 2 of the kind of scummiest owners that you don't have to put like corollary and everything.
Well, there's a lot of scummy people in DC,
right?
If you know what I mean.
I may or may not have been leading into that one.
Yeah.
But so I'm a Lions fan. I don't know if we just I might have had my Barry Sanders jersey on the day that we met, but here's the coaster.
Oh,
so I always let every guest know I'm hardcore Lions. And like you said, I'm never gonna leave them.
Well, you might have remembered Dave Eddy at the Expo. He was sitting. He's a really tall guy that was behind the booth for us.
Probably talked to him about it too.
He's a huge Lions fan. You probably did.
I might have even asked him to come on the show because I have to talk to somebody. I don't get to talk to too many Lions fans on here, even though the last guest was the the fantasy football dad. He's out of Boston area, but he's actually a Lions fan. Go figure, because of Eddie Murphy, Beverly Hills Cop, when he wore that coat. When he was a kid, he saw that jacket.
Oh man.
So,
Old
yeah,
school
I
movie,
mean,
man.
it's something that like you don't think about as why would you be a Lions fan from Boston? But then that came up like, oh, okay, I can get it because he was there. He would have been at the age of before Barry Sanders was there, so it's not like he was rooting for him initially. Sure, there's Billy Sims before then, but you're talking like even before that time frame. But I mean, so you said you kind of took a break. You're kind of coming back into it. What, just because now you're trying to follow it again, or just what is it? The whole.
I just didn't root for them. I didn't watch the games unless they were like the prime time game or they happened to be on Red Zone. Usually what my Sundays look like is I've got Red Zone on and then I've got a second TV on with the Commanders game on. But I had no rooting interest in that team. I did not care what happened to them for probably about 4-ish years here. It was a weird feeling to like not have a rooting interest for a team. I mean, like my diehardness has probably fallen off a little bit because I do get myself kind of sucked into the fantasy, of everything. And so, but I do find myself rooting for him. Like when, this past week, right, the Eagles game, like when they scored that tying touchdown, man, like my family heard me upstairs, like it felt good to do that again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's something that now you're talking to, again, a Lions fan that this past Thursday night. So for the listener of the show, this is the, let's see here, Monday after we beat the Packers in Lambeau Field and we just crushed them, but whatever. And it was just one of those things that at the time of it, I mean, now that we're 3-1, it almost, in my lifetime, I've never really experienced it because I was too young when we were in 91 when we won that playoff game, the one playoff game since 57 that we won. But, we ended up losing to somebody that like that team technically doesn't exist anymore by name status and everything like that. That may or may not have dominated us, but yeah.
Super Bowl champions.
Yep. But then, so it's just a different feeling, but I found myself, not because of the same reason as you, but I found myself not paying attention as much to the Lions game. And I've talked about this on the show of fantasy football somewhat took over. It's like all you do is box scroll watch, or you watch the apps on the phones and all that type of stuff. Yeah. So I've been able to this year more so, and it's easier when they're winning to just put it down. Sure, I'd check it during maybe halftime, quarters, plays, and stuff like that. But, I'm into it more than I would have been in the, before kind of thing.
Yeah, Lions are
it's easier when you have the fighting Dan Campbells and everything like that. But so we brought you on this show for fantasy football, not to talk about why we don't want to talk about the Lions losing to the Skins back in 91 and all that stuff. We're going to talk about what's the first memory you have of fantasy football? Playing it or just hearing about it?
So yeah, man, it was like my sophomore year in college, or maybe my junior year. I kind of forget exactly what year, but I just remember like one of my friends was like, "Hey, you want to play this thing called fantasy football?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, sure, man. What is it?" And they explained it, and I was like, "Yeah, whatever, man." And they were like, "All right, sign up, create this account, log into this Yahoo League," and nobody knew what they were doing back then. And we actually did an auto draft. So a complete full auto draft. And I remember I ended up getting like Steve McNair and like guys like that, Joe Horn, man, like this is back in like 2002. So, those were like the studs, right? And it was, I ended up getting second place in the league. And I'll tell you, man, like I fell in love with it right away because when I was a kid, like I used to open up the newspapers and like read the box scores. And like when I played video games, man, I stat hunted and like tried to do all that stuff. So that was right up my alley, man. I was like, wait, there's a game that you literally just have to know about the stats? Oh, I'm in.
Yeah.
I was hooked.
You said it was like auto draft there from the beginning, but then as it started transitioning, did you ever get into like live drafts and stuff, or has it only been online?
Oh, well, yeah, no. So what I mean by auto draft is we literally had the computer draft our entire league.
So
first season
everybody,
because nobody knew what they were doing. Yeah. So, but yeah, of course, at this point, now I don't auto draft any of my teams, unless there's some sort of accident. But that hasn't happened in forever. So yeah, I'm in a couple of leagues where we actually do draft in person. if possible. We do have the online option for people, but most of my leagues online, slow drafts. I'm in a Scott Fish and all these industry leagues that do kind of the slow draft type deal, and all the best balls on Underdog and things like that. So lots of leagues, lots of slow drafts, lots of online live drafts, whatever. Too many to count.
Yeah, I'm actually a super not fan of the slow draft. I don't know if it's because I'm impatient or because I like the fact of trying to go pick my guy right away to make everybody else flustered, and I'm okay with on the fly, and I'm cool with going with the flow. I don't know what it is, but just those slow drafts, man, I don't like them too much.
They're not, I don't like them as much. I get it. But I also understand why they exist. Like you take something like Scott Fish, right? Where you're playing against people that live in California. You get playing against people that live in another country. The only way to really do it is a slow draft. Like the time difference and things like that is too crazy to try to get people that are all over the place. And, especially if it's like some sort of industry league, most of the people that I'm friends with in the industry are in, 10, 12, 15, 20 leagues, and so I can't plan that many live drafts, even if it is online. So relying on the online, on the slow portion of it is key to get us into those types of, into that many leagues.
I mean, it makes just time constraints. And when you're like you said, it makes perfect sense. It's just the gamesmanship of it or something I'm not as much of a fan of. What about going back to your drafts? So I like to ask, what are your favorite, I don't know if it was like, people call them flag plant players, or they call them favorite players of all time, or someone that you just seem to fall in love with, always try to get them on your team throughout the years.
Keenan Allen lately has been a big favorite of mine. I know he's been, off and on injured, but I always feel like he's super underrated, and like we're seeing it this year. The Deuce is a monster. He's always been a guy who I have targeted heavily in leagues. Back in the day, and man, I'm gonna blank on his name. He was a Saints running back who I just absolutely would go crazy over.
Deuce?
Oh man, he was
Deuce McAllister?
Who?
Mark Ingram?
No,
I'm just trying to think of guys that were there.
Yeah, it would have been like, I don't even know. It probably would have been like
Pierre Thomas.
20...
I'm trying to think of some other ones.
It might have been Pierre Thomas. Well, Pierre Thomas was one. He's actually another one now that you say it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of some other like favorites.
What about like homeschool
mine.
Guys? You any well, I guess they weren't Commanders back then, but like were you ever that kind of guy? Like, oh man, I always want to get one of my players, my home team.
No, actually, I kind of avoided it. And I mean, it didn't help that back then the Redskins, they just weren't good for the most part. But I would say I did have my fair share of Clinton Portis when he was on the team. I mean, he was a stud, man. The dude couldn't be stopped when he was right. But I mean, ultimately, like that team just didn't produce many relevant fantasy players for a long time. So outside of like him and like Santana Moss, like nah. avoid the Skins at all possible.
So Portis was actually drafted by Washington, then traded. Oh, he was the other way around, drafted by Denver.
Yeah, they traded.
Was that how Champ Bailey got involved?
Champ
man,
Bailey.
They got the raw end of that deal.
Champ Bailey went over to Denver. Yeah, Champ Bailey went over to Denver, and then the Skins ended up getting.
Just
Portis.
imagine now in today's climate where running backs don't really matter and can't get contracts. There's no way that you get a trade for like a top cornerback like that.
No, definitely not. Well, no, I mean now cornerbacks are the game is completely changed. But yeah, it's you would never see anything like that. I am trying to look up the old Saints.
I mean, when you say it,
here.
I mean, of course Reggie Bush, but that's too big of a name. You'd probably remember him. And
no, he was definitely not it. It was a guy who like kind of didn't really pop, and it might have actually been. Now that you said it, I think it is Pierre Thomas. Now that you say it, he was never like the guy, you know, like, but man, when he got his opportunity, man, he was so good. He was just kind of like steady and you could always get him super.
I feel like he was there during the Colston era when Marcus Colston was at his heyday, if I remember correct.
That sounds right.
Like young Drew Brees time frame.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, so he was there 2007 through 2014. I mean, he had a couple of years where he was over 1,000 scrimmage yards. I mean, the dude was catching, 50 passes a couple of seasons, caught 77 in 2013.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints won in like
PPR
2010-ish, 2011 when they won that Super Bowl at somewhere around that time frame. So yeah, he would have been there in the middle of his career.
Yeah, I mean, the 2013 season where he caught the 77 passes, it was Pierre Thomas and Mark Ingram. And then, yeah, receivers were, Jimmy Graham and Colston. There you go. Lance Moore.
Oh, good old Lance Moore. Yeah, I remember him too. Yeah, that takes me down. I remember a couple times when I had him on my team and like he pulled it out for me, a guy out of nowhere, like the waiver wire wonder dude.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Huh. Okay, well, you kind of made it earlier. You talk about, Washington traded Portis and Denver and Champ Bailey maybe being the better end of that deal. I didn't show you this, so I'm not going to get up, but way, way back. Oh, how do I do this here? Way, way back there. There's the DeLorean right there. So normally I bring it to the camera with me, but yeah, you're going to go back in time in the DeLorean. You get one mulligan on maybe a trade or a draft pick you made that you're like, oh my gosh, if I could have done this differently, I would have been so much better off.
Oh my gosh. So many. I've been playing for far too long.
What's that one that sticks in your craw the most, though?
I honestly, with like picks, I mean, it's draft and forget, man. Like you can't do it. Like, I mean, I'm just in too many leagues now. Trades though. Ooh, I'm trying to think of a trade.
Well, I'll give you one that happened this past couple weeks ago for me then. So speaking of Saints, I gave away Stephon Diggs, Samaje Perine, and some throwaway guy for Roshan Johnson, Chris Olave, and Elijah Mitchell because I figured the backup Roshan was about to take over and Olave. Diggs just put up a 3-burger for touchdowns and like 150 yards or something.
Yeah, that's definitely tough. I don't know how much of like a regret it was, but I think I changed the balance of the league when I did it. My team started out 0-3 or something like that. And I was like, man, I got to do something. I had no depth. I had Julio Jones and when he was still like Julio Jones. And I traded him away for 2, maybe even 3, like good players. I ended up almost making the playoffs, so it wasn't like totally regrettable. But I think the team that got Julio Jones just like steamrolled to the playoffs, and people were really pissed at me.
Yeah, it's one of those.
But like at the same time, I'm like, dude, I'm desperate. I'm trying to get into the playoffs myself. I'm not trying to be 0-15 or whatever it is. So it's stuff like that where it's hard, man. You're just trying to do anything you can to get in. I don't know. I don't honestly remember a lot of my trades. I mean, I've just been playing for far too long. And honestly, in a lot of leagues I'm in, like we don't really trade much anymore. And nobody just really does. For some reason, we're all just sort of like we draft and just play the wire and things like that. So some of the trades I've made back in the, long time ago, I don't ever really remember them.
Well, that's okay because, like you gave a bit of I always say gridiron knowledge nuggets from my other show, The Football History Dude. But so fantasy knowledge nuggets, you said draft and forget. Don't like sit there and worry about it and regret it and all that kind of stuff. Just move on to next week kind of thing, which helps us transition into the reason why we got you here, so fantasy 6-pack. We're going to take that DeLorean again, but I want you to kind of go back to maybe when you started kind of initially covering fantasy football in some way to the public, all the way up till the Fantasy Football Expo, where you met the Football History Dude, and now we're talking on this show.
Yeah. So, it kind of links back to my initial fantasy football league, right? And about 10, maybe 8 or so years after that, I'm out of college, and I've been in leagues with all my friends for a few years, and typically I've been beating them most years out of not. And so, we're all sitting there one night drinking some beers, watching Sports Center, something comes on about fantasy football, and they're like, "Oh man, you should do that, blah blah." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever, man." And they're like, "No, seriously, you should start your own site." And I'm like, all right. So I did. But how it comes full circle to that first league was the guy that I lost to. His name is Garrick Smith. He was the initial person who ran and started the site with me. He doesn't write for me anymore, or write for the site anymore. But yeah, he was the one he actually came up with the name Fantasy Six Pack. We were kind of going back and forth with names, and he's like, "Well, we both like beer," and I was like, "All right, well, let's not sound like total alcoholics. So how else could we kind of spin the six?" And he's like, what about Six Sports?" And I was like, "Sounds good to me. Let's do it." So, the thing behind Fantasy Six Pack is that we cover 6 sports. So we have football, baseball, hockey, basketball. We do golf. It used to be like NASCAR, and like we've thrown in like Premier League soccer before, but now the 6 is kind of I guess we'll do college sports. So we kind of have like 5.5. But anyway, but yeah, so it was back in like 2010. Just kind of started my own blog, and I didn't really know what I was doing with it. It was just for fun. Just kind of like, it was always like, oh, I'll just do this and ESPN will find me. Okay. Maybe not, but it was always a fun dream, kind of off and on for, a few years going that. And then, just sort of powered through. And what really propelled me to, where we are now is, I was doing rankings on my site. That was my big thing. I did fantasy football rankings. And what I ended up doing was, I was just typing in like a list every single week. And man, updating that list when I needed to update it every week or daily during the week was brutal. And so I came across a site that was using the Fantasy Pros like widget tool. And if you go to our site now, that's what we use to display our rankings. And I finally was like, I emailed them, was like, "Hey, can I get access to your rankings tool so that I can then publish it on my site so that, it makes it a little easier for me to manage?" Like, I don't need to be part of this like ECR thing or whatever it is, but this was back in like 2015 and I barely knew what it was. And they allowed me to do it. And then they were just like, oh, 1 year later, they threw me in the ECR. And if you don't know what ECR is, it's Expert Consensus Rankings on Fantasy Pros. That's the accuracy challenge. And when you go to their site, you see now there's like 200 plus people who rank on their site. That's the ECR, that collection of rankings that you see. It's the consensus rankings. And so I got included. And then the very next year, I get an email in the preseason saying that I finished in the top 10 for the 2016 draft rankings. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? Okay. So like it just started snowballing from there. And then, more and more people were interested in starting to write for the site, and just getting more writers, more content, more, visibility. I ended up doing really well in the weekly rankings in 2019 and 2020, finished top 5. I've been inside the top 20, top 15 since then, finished number 2 last year in the draft rankings. So done pretty well. I've done well in the baseball ones as well. So that's how my name got known, I feel like. But we've got a lot of other things over there, Fantasy Six Pack too. So it's not just the rankings; it's a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, so I'm on the website right now, and like you said, there's a lot of other things. And if I'm someone, let's take I'm in the website and I'm thinking about kind of joining in. This is at fantasy6pack.net for the listener of the show. What do you recommend for someone that wants to navigate through your site just to get a general feel of what you're all about?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you can go to the plans page and it kind of gives you a breakdown of what comes with the memberships. So we do sell memberships now. The rankings and some of the more premium content, like our DFS projections and we have a stacking tool, and some of our betting and DFS articles are behind the paywall. We've got a couple, some of our redraft and our dynasty articles, baseball and football, are behind the paywall as well. A lot of the content is free though. So if you want to get a taste, of like start sit articles actually I don't have on paywall too. I forget now. So but we do have a good bit of free content. So you can feel free to browse around, look at everything. If you do want access to these rankings, that have won us awards, and then, you do have to become a member, and, it's pretty cheap. It includes all the sports. So it's not just football for whatever. So if you play all the sports, you play basketball, you play hockey, it comes with our Discord as well, where you can get direct access to all of us and, ask questions directly about your league. We've got guys over there, Chris Robin, Detroit Beastie on Twitter. We got Dave Eddy. We've got, Mark Strasburg. We've got Alan Sandage. We've got Keith Fleming, all giving fantastic DFS and betting advice. And I mean, honestly, $10 a month, these guys are paying for your membership and more, because they're winning you money on FanDuel, DraftKings, wherever you put in the money for that kind of stuff each and every week. I mean, just to let you know, like, I don't play a lot of DFS because I don't have time for it, because I'm so sucked into everything else on the site and all my redraft rankings. Dave posted like a list of players, his player pool for week 3 in DFS. And I was like, I've actually got a couple hours. I actually planned ahead this week for once. So I jumped in, looked at his player pool, was like, okay, bang, 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 put in a lineup, put in like, $30 worth of lineups, and doubled my money. Just like that. I mean, just so quick and easy. It's not going to be every week, because nobody's going to ever be 100% right. But I mean, they've been right 3 out of 4 weeks so far this year. So, I mean, that's pretty good. So, you can make up the money for the subscription just by listening to those guys. And then hopefully, me and the rest of the kind of redraft focus guys can help you win your championships, which, we all know are dear to our hearts, when it comes down to it. We all want to beat our friends.
And so the listener of the show that's checking this out, so you go to just subscribe up there, and then that's where the plans page is. And I see that you have, so the monthly, or then you can get like maybe a discount if you purchase at 3 months, 6 months, or a year long at a time. Now, how does that work for the listener?
Absolutely.
They just get access straight to 6 months, and then they have to resubscribe for another 6, or then they get to choose after that time frame?
No. So it'll, it actually auto renews. So you'd have to cancel if you don't want it. Yeah, I mean, and during the year, we will offer some promo codes. We don't have anything going on right now. It's, it's week 4 of the NFL season. Baseball's done. Basketball and hockey isn't really anything that's driving memberships right now. So we don't even really put the content behind the paywall for those. Once baseball gets back up and going here, or early next year, we'll probably throw out another promo code for that. We might have something kind of mid-season for football to kind of get some people in with DFS, that kind of thing. But, always look out to our Twitter at Fantasy Six Pack, all spelled out. That's where you'll find the promo codes.
Perfect. And again, so because this is the full swing of fantasy football, we're only going into week 5 here pretty soon. Actually, we have to take a look and see if Russell Wilson's done me any good. And hopefully for you, like I said, it's, I'm okay with if it's not to DK Metcalf, as long as it's, and you can have KJ Walker. You can have Walker go ahead and get it. That's fine. But as we get into the part where the person that's listening, they're like, I'm really thinking this is cool. I kind of want to follow these dudes other than just through maybe go to their website. You kind of head out the Twitter handle, but like, what's the best way for someone to get in contact with you if they want to?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the best way is on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is at F6P_Joe. Or you can try it through the site's Twitter, but I honestly, I don't run that one myself personally. I do get notifications for it, but I don't pay that close of attention to it. So you'd be better off just hitting me up personally. You could also jump into our Discord. It is free. We have some free channels where, we are having a lot of discussions, throwing some news out, some tips and advice here and there. So that's fantasy6pack.net/Discord. And then obviously, if you want to become a member, you'll get access to those premium channels where you can, really get the nitty gritty advice that you're going to want, your specific trades, your specific waiver wire questions, your specific lineup questions that week, all the DFS and the betting advice that these guys are throwing out. That's where you get access to that. And that's price of admission right there. I mean, that's worth it.
Okay, so the person that might be listening to this show, this is a podcast part of what we call the Sports History Network. It has a lot of other shows on the network that are all sports history related. So the demographic and the listener might not know what this term Discord means. Could you maybe explain to them a little bit of what this tool is and how they could utilize it?
Yeah, so Discord's a just like an online, basically like a chat server, really. And it's you go in, there's different servers out there for multiple reasons, but my site has one. A bunch of other fantasy sites have their own, and they run it however they run it. But you jump in, and then there's different like rooms that you can go into, different, they call them channels. So if you think of like old chat rooms, right? For that kind of thing, it would be like a room, but they're called channels. And so you go into like, we've got one for like football general chat, right? And so you just go into the football general chat. We post up like injury updates and kind of how that's going to affect the lineups and things like that. And, we're just, sometimes, we just have fun in there too. We'll just chat about the games and just react and, just stuff like that. And so, it's a good time.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. It's like the old school, like chat rooms and stuff like that. And just community be able to get there. What about, so if the listener does have some kind of keen interest into possibly maybe seeing about if they'd be able to write for your site, is there any kind of application process, or is it something where it's just, you reach out to them only?
So we currently don't have any openings right now, but we do have an application that it's closed right now, but we usually do have a page. It's fantasy6pack.net/apply. And then if the application is open, then you'll see the form there. So it's a Google form. And then I'm usually one to kind of write back and respond that way. Okay.
And you mentioned earlier the Fantasy Pros. I kind of skipped or glazed over this, but as you had, that's one reason why we talked about having you on the show anyways, is your success. And then that's how you kind of fell into this whole starting your own, or I guess really launching the website more so and everything. The Fantasy Pros rankings itself, or like when you or whoever puts in the rankings, what's either your superpower or really more so I'm trying to get an angle of tips you can give somebody when they're trying to create their own rankings in their head?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, when I first did it, it was a lot of just my gut feel. I just kind of went through, obviously I'm doing research. I'm looking at, points allowed, points scored by the player, that kind of stuff. And, you just kind of have a general knowledge of the game. And so I was putting my own rankings together that way. I did that for years. It was just a lot of gut and feel, a lot of research, a lot of, hearing what's going on, a lot of, reacting to injuries and that kind of thing. My process has been, streamlined a little bit more at this point, improved, I think, to where I am incorporating some projections. And then, from there is kind of where I have kind of my gut and my instinct kind of play, there. And then, but yeah, the biggest thing for me, and I tell this to everybody who writes for me, who wants to be included in the rankings on our site, is it's a grind. Like, you have to stay on top of the news. You've got to update the rankings. Not only because if you want to do well in the accuracy challenge, right? You can't be leaving injured players in your rankings. You can't not, not take out or drop somebody in the rankings who is, potentially not going to play a full slew of snaps, right? Because they've been passed in the depth chart. Like, you've got to be able to recognize those types of things, right? And then it's not just like, okay, so, receiver A is out, right? So let's say next week, right? Let's say Mike Evans is out, right? Because he just, pulled his hamstring or whatever. Let's say he misses next week, right? Obviously, Godwin gets a boost. But who else gets a boost, right? It's not just one guy, right? And so, same thing with an injury, right? Like on Sunday morning at 11:30 p.m. Eastern time or a.m. Eastern time when the injuries come out, right? Guy who is questionable, is inactive, right? It's not usually just one guy who gets affected, right? It's not just you take that player out and you're good. It's who's the next man up? How far are they? Like, it's not a 1-to-1 replacement usually either. So you've got to figure out, okay, who's the main beneficiary and then who are all the secondary beneficiaries? Or does the quarterback take a hit because they're missing their number one receiver now? That kind of thing. So it's a lot of moving pieces and you've really got to think about everything when it comes down to it. And really it is just staying on top of it. I mean, I know a lot of people who are in the accuracy challenge who I know are smarter than what their accuracy ranking shows them to be, but they're just not on top of their rankings. They just don't update them often enough. And so their accuracy ranking is crummy. But I respect their opinion. I know they're smart guys. But they just don't put the time into the ranking. So if you really want to be good at it, you got to put in the effort. If you just want to be, part of the process and have your name on Fantasy Pros, then okay, I guess it'll be there.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, so someone that listened to that, they're like, I like the way that he broke that down and he gave some advice to me. And there are other ways to consume your content by listening to you or seeing your beautiful face. What else do we have as far as availability by media?
Yeah, so I do a podcast on Thursday nights at 9:30 Eastern time. The Fantasy Six Pack Hour. My co-host is AJ Applegarth. Producer is Mike LaPlante. We usually bring in some guests every week to help us out. During the season, we break down rankings, via some start sit questions that our producer kind of comes up with, that are, kind of interesting ones like, these ECRs are, these consensus rankings are pretty close for these guys. And so, who would you pick between the two? And it kind of gives you a little insight into some of my rankings, even though they are behind the paywall. And then, we go over news, big news for the week type of things and kind of react to that. So that's where you could typically find me during the season and during the off season, elsewhere. All
right, perfect. So as we get close to ending here, that DeLorean that I pointed to way back there, I'd do better if I had it in front of you. You get to take this one into the future this time. It's going to be 5, 10. I'm not putting a number on it. You get to go in the future sometime and either give to me something that you would like to see in fantasy football or NFL, or something that you predict is going to happen that's inevitably going to, a change that we can't get out of the way of.
Something in fantasy. There's definitely something in baseball that I would
go ahead and hit that on here. That's fine.
So for fantasy baseball, the thing I really want to see is a more standardized, like, so in baseball, there's head-to-head categories and there's rotisserie categories for people who know what that is. But then there's points leagues. I would love to see a very standardized points system, almost to the same, thing with like IDP, like for football. IDP leagues is all over the place because the scoring for IDP is just, one league will have 5 points for a tackle. One league will have 3. One league will have 1 point for a tackle, like 3 points for a sack, 5 points for a sack. It's all over the place. So it's like, it's impossible to it's really hard to give advice for an IDP league and a fantasy baseball points league for the same reason. So I would love to see like a more standardized kind of thing there with both of those.
Okay, so you did bring it back to football. So we have something there, for a fantasy football show.
Even though I don't play IDP, but we are jumping in. We have brought that to the forefront on our site this year.
I haven't been able to play an IDP in quite some time. When I ran my own league, we turned it into a IDP league, and I loved it. I mean, it was just that extra added wrinkle, especially no matter what side of the ball was playing and everything when you're watching the game. But I'd also like to see, similar to the old school baseball, I mean, I'm sure they have it now probably with the rotisserie, but kind of like some kind of rotisserie style for football. And I'm sure it's out there, but not like mainstream. I kind of like to see that more.
I have heard of it before. I think that's tough only because not every player can get you stats in every category. Like, at least in baseball, you have, you've got your pitchers and you've got your hitters, right? And so all your hitters can contribute to all hitting categories, and all your pitchers can contribute to all your hitting categories or your pitching categories. But in football, like, let's be real, quarterbacks aren't catching the ball, right? So like, and that's hard. And your other players aren't throwing the ball. You're going to get a random, like, running back pass or receiver pass every now and then, but that's hard. That I think rotisserie football is a really hard one for me to wrap my head around.
That's a good point to bring up. It's almost like you'd have to have additional type of key contributing factors that, indicators that lead to the outcome of a successful game, besides just like what our standard scoring is for fantasy football and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's a good way to put it. What about now? We're going to really get you zooming on out of here, but what we want you to do is give the listener of the show last words of, we're going to call it fantasy football knowledge nuggets, but it's like through the lens of somebody who kind of fell into this whole creating fantasy football content, and advice, their tips, whatever it is you may give to the person that's like, I kind of want to do that, but I just don't know how to jump into the water.
First off, you just got to do it, man. You just, whoever is out there, guy, girl, just try, right? Apply to many different places. Hell, start your own site, right? Write your own stuff, at least to have samples. Just the one thing I would say, especially now, like, I've gone through the years of, where there weren't as many sites out there. If you really want to try to hook onto one of these bigger sites, you have to be able to write well. You have to be able to pay attention to detail. Silly things like you cannot misspell players' names right. You're wrong. Like you just cannot do stuff like that. You will immediately just, like, if you send me a writing sample and it's got a misspelled player name, you're probably not getting the job, and you're probably not getting the job anywhere else. It's just, that's what it is. You want to write for your own site and misspell some player names, that kind of stuff. Like, look, a little grammar stuff here and there, whatever. Like, that's what editors are for. But you've got to pay attention to detail and learn your craft, learn what you're good at, and just run with it. If you're a podcast guy, learn it, learn what works, learn the technology. If you're a writer, learn what, search engine optimization, learn how this stuff ultimately becomes successful. Don't just expect to write a blog, write an article and just have it show up and get, 10,000 views. It doesn't work like that. You have to learn how people will actually find it, what works, what doesn't. Put in the effort, and believe me, if people recognize that you're putting in that effort, they will be paying attention to you.
There you go. Just try it. Go out there, do something, and apply to some places. Start your own site, whatever it is. Really make sure you're holding on your craft, though. Spelling players' names right, learning how to write well, everything else that comes along with putting something into a professional public space. And speaking of the grind and sweating it, we talked about how we're in the middle of watching the Seahawks game scores, and Joe needed Walker to score more than Metcalf, but I needed a total of 18 points between Jason Myers and Geno. This is in my main league, mind you not. Then we keep the interview going. I look at the box score after our interview, only to find out Geno Smith is hurt. Halftime in a locker room. Then he comes back. He's in the lineup. Throws a touchdown. Then as I was writing this outline right here for the outro, I have then ... because I didn't know what it was going to be because I was still in the middle of it before the game ends. Of course, Geno Smith, Jason Myers scores another field goal, but then yours truly loses by like 3 or 4 points. Fantasy football, man. It's why we love to hate to love this game. About a game. love to hate to love this game about a game, folks. Speaking of this game, I love hearing about the origin stories of the people in the industry, and I hope you do too. If you enjoyed this show, well, I mean, sure, I got to ask you to go ahead and share this episode with your friend, mash that little subscribe, follow button on your podcast player of choice so we get to hottest specials out the press episodes, rate and review your app of choice. Just gave you a whole lot of calls to action there. But all that stuff, mind you not, what I really want you to do is I want you to reach out to us, kind of give me a little bit of feedback. You could go to the contact page at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com or even hit me up on Twitter X Twitter, whichever one it is. The handle is FHDude, standing for the Football History Dude, the namesake of the first podcast that I started. Only here on the Sports History Network. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fantasy Football Origin Stories. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please make sure to mash that little subscribe or follow button on your podcast player of choice, then head over to the website for the show notes and more Fantasy Football Origin Stories. That's at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
The Pigskin Tales podcast is all about the lesser-known pro football players. Yes, there are stories about the ones we know, like Brad Tarkenton and Harold Red Grange. But have you ever heard of Ernie Nevers? How about Dave Osborne or even Grady Alderman? These men created their own path to the NFL. How did they do it? Listen to the Pigskin Tales podcast, now streaming on your favorite music platform. Go to pigskintales.com.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.